Welcome to my blog stampwithelaine.com and welcome to my 2018 12-week countdown to Christmas, which I publish every Friday until the 7th of December. Today is episode 7 and it's time to create an advent calendar in time for December the 1st. Before I start, I want to point out for November the Snowflake Showcase. This is available from the 1st to the 30th of November while supplies last. I will be featuring the stamp set in the last couple of days for my advent calendar. This is called The Snow is Glistening. It's photopolymer and there is a die. There's no bundle price for this, they're separate. So these are the dies, which is absolutely gorgeous. They're sold separately. This is the other stamp set, also in photopolymer, and it's called Happiness Surrounds. Included in this promotion, there are some snowflake trinkets. There are 20 in a box, and they are £7.50 in Europe, 10 each of 2 designs. If I hold it up to the camera, there's a little rhinestone in the middle of each of the snowflakes. There's also white velvet sheets. There's 2 each of a 12 by 12 sheet. And they're £4.75 and they pick up dirt like anything, so you know, keep it protected, and just they're great for cutting out snowflakes. To make my advent calendar, you need 3 packs of Santa sacks. You need 24 in all. I've made all of these using different stamp sets. Just got 2 more to do and I'll show you how. Probably wondering how I got the words to emboss the right way up onto the Santa's bag. You need to cut 24 pieces of vellum cardstock measuring 5 inches by 4 inches. In metric that will be 12.7 by 10.2 centimetres. If you can, cut extras in case you make mistakes. You need to have a Stamparatus because that's invaluable to keep your images in position without moving, because you have to stamp the right way up first and then flip it over and stamp the other side in order to get the mirror image. You need Versamark ink, embossing buddy, and these in colour embossing powders, so I'm just using Blueberry Bushel, Call Me Clover and Lovely Lipstick, and also gold embossing powder. You need an iron and an ironing board. You need at least 1 set that has numerals on it. I'm using the Make a Difference photopolymer stamp set and I'm using the numerals on here. Some hints and tips. Take out the numerals you need. There's less faff. Rather than putting it back in the box every time you need a number, I just put all the numbers on a block and it was just much easier to access. Before I start, I want to give you some hints and tips. If you're using photopolymer stamps on your Stamparatus, it would be handy to use a sentiment that is also photopolymer. If you use photopolymer stamp and the clear mount stamp, you can see it's got a different depth. Can you see that if I hold it up? This is much higher up and that's much lower down. So the photopolymer, you're going to need the foam mat, and this one you don't. It will save you time if you can stamp both together because of the fact that you're using the mirror technique. So it's much more user-friendly if you had both as a photopolymer stamp or both as a clear mount stamp. As I don't have a stamp in clear mount in numerals, I have to use the photopolymer stamp, so it just made sense for me to use sentiments that were also photopolymer. With your Stamparatus, you also need a silicone mat and a cleaning cloth. Because I'm stamping in photopolymer, I'm going to need my foam mat, silicone mat on top. Make sure it's dry before you use it. It's advisable to have a worksheet, so I made a worksheet for myself with 1, 2, 3, 7 columns. In the first column I had all the embossing, the colour of the embossing powder, and then top column I had the name of the stamp sets with Make a Difference plus one other stamp set. Then I had boxes for the 24 days to the run-up of Christmas Day. So I have day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and so on, to cover all 24 days. And then I just looked at my chart to see what colour I was supposed to emboss it in, the name of the stamp set, and I just worked down each column like so with the 4 different colours of embossing powder. Now, because I use more than one stamp set, in the end I just wrote the name of the stamp set in the boxes, because they varied so much. You know, I might use an additional photopolymer sentiment stamp set because the clear mount ones just wouldn't go with the photopolymer stamps on the same plate, on the same side, if you follow my drift. This is the worksheet saying you're starting from scratch. So there's your embossing powder colour, there's the name of the stamp sets up here. In all the columns you've got Make a Difference, because that's a numeral set and you need that anyway. And then the second set is just whatever you wish. Once you've cut all your vellum cardstock at 5 inches by 4 inches, mark them all with EP, which stands for embossing powder, and you'll understand why as we go along. First, we want to set up the Stamparatus. I've got my number here, 18, with the sentiment, both in photopolymer. We're going to be using the Snow is Glistening stamp set. This is in photopolymer. I'm using this greeting and the Make a Difference numerals. So I've got a clean silicone mat, and I need my Versamark, and I'm going to stamp with the Versamark first. Okay, and I'm stamping it onto the silicone mat. Okay, and then on this plate here I've mounted this image, this and this little image here. So I shall ink that up also in Versamark. And then stamp that onto my silicone mat as well. Next, I'm going to run the embossing buddy over the side where it says embossing powder. Give it a good tap and cover it all. Then I want to flip this over so that the embossing powder side is face down, and I'll butt it up into the corner of the Stamparatus. And then I'll bring my plates down again and stamp again. And by doing this, it will pick up the ink from the silicone mat and transfer it onto the underside of the vellum cardstock. And I will do the same for these images here. So if you want to do it in a single colour, then you stamp the sentiment followed by image, one after the other. So then when you flip your cardstock over with the embossing powder side down, then you can just put the embossing powder all over it in the one colour. But if you want a two-tone one, you need to stamp them separately. So I shall just stamp the sentiment first, because I want the sentiment in a different colour. Whoops. So there's my writing, EP, on the front. So I'll put embossing powder all over the front. Flip it over. So then my embossing powder lettering is on the reverse, and this is face down on the silicone mat. I bring my plate down and stamp again without inking it, but this action means that it will pick up the ink that's been left on the silicone mat and transfer it onto your vellum cardstock. So with the lettering EP on top, this is the side you want to put your embossing powder on. So let's do that. So this embossing powder, EP has to be face up, and you're looking at the Versamark letters. I don't know if you can see that. This will be the mirror image, and it will become visible once I put the embossing powder on. Okay. If you have a steam iron, then you need to put it on the non-steam setting. So this is my Santa's bag, and when you're ironing it on, transferring the ink onto the bag, do it without wiggling the iron. So place it on your Santa's sack and then just press for a few seconds, lift up, and then it would transfer onto your bag. Hopefully it'll come out like that. We're ready to do the other side. Now it's important that you clean the silicone mat of all residue of the Versamark ink from your project before. Then flip it over to the other side so you can be sure it's dry before you stamp the next one, because any moisture will pick up the embossing powder if it gets onto your vellum cardstock. And to be on the safe side, it's probably better to use a different sheet so you don't transfer any of what's left on this sheet onto. I've got my EP there, so that's the side the powder has to go on. Ink up my snowflakes. This time I want that in blueberry bushel, so stamp. Actually, this doesn't need to be reversed, but we'll do it just so that you get used to what you're supposed to be doing. Okay. Set that aside first, and let's clean the silicone mat, ready for your next one. So I need to put embossing powder where it says EP the right way up. Put embossing powder all over there. Flick off the excess. Pour it back into my pot. Bring my bag back, and then with the embossing powder face down, I pop that onto my bag and make sure where you're going to place it, because once it's down you don't want to move it, otherwise it will mark the bag. It's not perfect because it's a bit difficult to do it under camera lens. I haven't got free rein as I would if I was standing at a proper ironing board. I made a mistake and misnumbered one of my bags, but rather than waste the bag, I just cut a spare one that I had that I'd made a mistake on. And that's the reason why you need to put EP on your vellum, because you forget which side you're supposed to put the embossing powder on, and you can do it the wrong way round, and that's what happened. So I just cut that up and then stamped another the correct number on and sewed it onto this bag so I wouldn't waste it. For my last day, I'm going to use this Hung with Care set. This one will be a triple tone. So again, to recap, make sure you write EP on your vellum pieces. Get the embossing buddy and put embossing powder on top of all of the sheets. Bring my Stamparatus in, and with the first plate I'm going to ink up with the Versamark. Make sure that my silicone mat is clean and dry, and I'm going to transfer the ink onto the silicone mat. Then, without re-inking, place my vellum cardstock with the embossing buddy side face down right into the corner, and stamp again to pick up the ink from the silicone mat and transfer it back onto the vellum cardstock. Flip it over so that the reverse side is showing and the EP initials is on the top. I'm going to clean my silicone mat, ready for the next step. Make sure it's dry. Flip it over to the other side with the gold embossing powder first. And the other point to note is that if you've got your strings all facing to the left, make sure that you have all the bags for all the days with the string pointing to the left as well. So pop this onto your bag, and remember, don't wiggle it around, just place it down to prevent it from smudging. Place your iron on top without wiggling it too much on the non-steam setting, and wait for it to transfer onto your bag. And hey presto, there it is. Now I'm going to ink up with Versamark the long stocking, as well as this stocking on the side, because I want those two to be in red. I should have removed this foam mat because I'm stamping with clear stamps and I forgot. Here's my vellum cardstock. This is the embossed powder side, so I'm going to flip that around. So then stamp that again to pick up the ink from the silicone mat and transfer it to the underside of the vellum cardstock, and do the same for this side. It hasn't quite picked up the ink right at the hinge, so what I'm going to do is slip this fun foam mat underneath. It's thinner than the Stampin' Up one. Just elevates the cardstock slightly. Clean my silicone mat again. Flip it over to the other side, ready for the next step. Embossing side the right way up, which initials EP right way up, so I know that the embossing powder has to go on this side. Flick off the excess, pop it back into the jar. I forgot to press record. Anyway, same deal, non-steam setting. Place that on top of your bag with the embossed powder face down. Remember not to shake or move it. Once you've committed to putting it on the bag, then leave it there. Iron straight down and up. Last stocking to do. Again, ink it up with Versamark. Into the hinge, stamp down. Got embossing powder on the top. Flip it over so that the embossing powder side is on the bottom. pick it up to transfer the ink onto this side. Clean your silicone mat. This time I want the Call Me Clover, and I've made sure that the embossing powder initials are face up, the right way up, so I know that that's the side I should put the embossing powder on. Bring my bag back, and I think it goes under the joy, just there. And remember, once you commit to putting it down, don't move your vellum cardstock around because it will smudge the embossing powder underneath. So your iron, again on a non-steam setting, straight down and up. So there you have it. That's my advent calendar for this year. When the light is better, I will take a picture of all 24 bags and it will be on my blog. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.